How do you assess the current state of Russia's nuclear deterrence? There's growing concern within the country that the Kremlin has allowed its deterrent to lose credibility, particularly after muted responses to NATO's escalations, including deep strikes and even attacks on nuclear infrastructure. Is there now internal pressure in Russia to radically reset its deterrent strategy?
Well, it's obviously being debated in the highest circles of the foreign policy establishment in Moscow. And I want to make a point clear that wouldn't be obvious to the general audience. What you and I are about to discuss is a matter of very considerable importance and attracts the attention of foreign policy professionals and defense professionals. The general public, in light of what I'm about to say about Mr. Putin's conduct, view him differently. They speak about the man's gentlemanly behavior, his tolerance for the juvenile behavior or the insulting behavior of American presidents. I use the plural here, and of European leaders, and they find this credible. They're very comfortable with that. They're happy that we're farther away from a war, as they see it. As people who are professionals, and you certainly are the most professional, but this is really your first specialty. We are of a different view, and the world that we live in is might makes right. And so that I'm not making a judgment, I'm making a statement of fact. In the world of geopolitics, right might makes right, and the meek and the timid tend to be crushed. That is not something the general public likes to understand. They also don't get the idea that when people are introduced to a public event, which we are told brings together the great and the good, that very distinction is foremost in the minds of the organizer of those events. There is a distinction between great and good, and powerful and people who are decent. They are not necessarily the same people. This is what we face today, and the problem that is arising now, and as you're describing it as a weakness or failing deterrent value of Russia, and we discussed this last time, and as you said, there are the three components to it, and what Russia seems to be missing at present is the demonstration that it's willing to use the wherewithal it has, and the communication of that determination, both to its adversaries and to the broad public. So this seems to be going down. It didn't just happen yesterday. I take this back, when we're speaking about Mr. Trump, to the period before he even took office, in his first mandate in December of 2016, when the outgoing Obama administration presented him with a poison chalice when they confiscated Russian diplomatic properties in the United States. And they were expecting that would elicit a violent response from Moscow, and which would spoil relations from day one. Well, there wasn't any response from Moscow, any credible response. They didn't do what they should have done then. So the weakness and the failure to respond in a traditional way, and according to diplomatic, tradition and rules of behavior, was being violated by Mr. Putin and his administration back then. It didn't just start yesterday, and it just accumulated over time with more strategically important assets being put in jeopardy, as you just described in the introduction, without Russia providing an adequate response. All that they have done is to emphasize from 2018 that they had world-beating military hardware, which was being put into mid-serial production and entering the armed forces. But when it came to proper response to demeaning acts that were wrought by Biden, nothing happened. And so there was a confidence that built up in the United States and in Western Europe, which only Mr. Trump recently said when he called Russia a paper tiger. Of course, all the pundits started talking about the Chinese reference, where it came from. Well, that's really irrelevant. That exists as a term that we all understand today. It is a country that projects power, but is unable or unwilling to um, to use that power or to wield the big stick when it needs to defend itself. And that's where Russia is today. I'm perplexed. I'm perplexed because Mr. Putin, from the day he came office, was praised or denounced as an alpha male. The whole feminist movement at once hated his guts because he was clearly, with his bare-chested, riding horses, this man was a man of great physical presence, even if he's small in stature. And he certainly, when he spoke about his childhood in Leningrad as a scrapper, a guy who was in the courtyards and was challenged by bullies who were always, this always happens among kids, and he stood up and struck first. Well, where is that Mr. Putin today? Gone. Now, we've all of us who've been watching this war have been called out, have been shown to be false prophets repeatedly, and we are rightly criticized by readers or viewers who point out that we have been saying and saying and saying that the end of the war is around the corner, when each time a new level of escalation was introduced, which made irrelevant and inaccurate all of our projections of a near-term end to this war, if it were being fought on traditional military values where certain losses are considered to be decisive, and you just withdraw from the contest, pay your fees, and look for another day. That hasn't happened. And so I finally became very tired of making false projections, as some of my peers are still doing. That, oh yes, it's crumbling, the Ukrainian army is being bashed. Well, it is being bashed, but it's been bashed from the first month of the war. For in the first month of the war, the Russians had a 10-to-1 artillery advantage, and presumably a 10-to-1 advantage in deaths and casualties. But the war didn't stop. And as I see this confiscation of 145 billion euros in frozen assets now in Belgium, if this indeed is realized, which it may well be, because the Europeans now are desperate to continue the war at whatever cost in violation of international law. And if that happens, then the war will go on for 3 or 4 more years. You mentioned I wrote volume 1. I expect to have volume 2 and 3 published in Q1 2026, but I don't want a whole library shelf of these volumes. I don't think anybody wants this to go on 3 or 4 more years. And the latest statements coming out of Vladimir Putin, we speak about the flip-flops of Trump. Well, he has flip-flopped from the Thursday evening phone conversation he had with Donald Trump on the evening before the arrival of Zelensky for his latest visit to the White House, when he was stern. Oh, we are told he was stern. We, of course, didn't have a public reading of the words, but what he said was repeated by Trump the next day to Zelensky, the words which we assume that he received from Putin, because before Putin said them, Vladimir Solovyov said those same words on air. And certainly those words came to Solovyov from Putin's people. So those words were, if you dare to provide tomahawks to Ukraine, we will destroy Ukraine. That's pretty strong stuff. And then a week later, Putin is backtracking. And yes, he's saying, oh, yes, well, but it's no longer destroy Ukraine. It's, well, that will be a real dent in our relations. So this is not serious. If I were any of Mr. Putin's enemies in the United States Senate or elsewhere in the U.S. government or sitting in Brussels, I would say, my goodness, that man is weak. and weak is the opposite of deterrent force.
Diplomacy seems completely dead. Sanctions are tightening, Russia's assets are being seized, and even its partners like India and China are under pressure. Everything that was discussed under Trump, peace efforts, acknowledging the roots of the conflict, is now off the table, with pressure building on Putin to reassert deterrence and with Russia appearing to be in a stronger position. If Moscow escalates now, will it trigger a direct war with NATO or actually help prevent it?
First, let's take one step back. You said everybody agrees that diplomacy is no longer an option. Everyone except Mr. Putin. In the last day, he has repeated that, well, 2 days ago, he was speaking and saying that talking is much better than confrontation. And then he sent Mr. Dmitriev to the United States on a fool's errand to that has the image that the United States and Russia are still talking to one another and are thinking about big business in the future. Well, this is absolutely empty show, and it only demonstrates a complete lack of understanding by Mr. Putin and the people who are advising him of who Mr. Trump is, what the American administration is, and how do you deal with them. He is dead wrong. This Mr. Dmitriev's mission is empty of content because everything Dmitry is a brilliant man who is very ambitious and is serving the boss of bosses with a view, obviously, to where his political career will go in the future. I have no objection to that. But what he's doing now is utterly stupid for the interests of Russia. You reward the United States by pretending that they're still in talking terms and have great business plans for the future the day after the United States has slapped secondary sanctions, which this was discussed in the with Trump, is discussed with Putin. What is the outcome or the likely result of these sanctions? And Putin said, "Oh, we will get along. It's not a deal." And Trump said, "We'll see how you're doing in 6 months." Between the two, I agree with Trump, and I disagree with Putin. What has happened? Just a little diversion here. We're speaking about the secondary sanctions on the two biggest buyers of Russian oil. That is India and China. These sanctions against China are almost without effect, not just because China will stop supplying rare metals to the United States and U.S. industry will shut down the next day, but because China has most of its oil coming to it by pipelines, which are really in no way affected by the sanctions that have been imposed because they are directed against seaborne oil. India is the opposite case. India does not have a stranglehold on rare metals. It has no cudgel to use to beat back the Americans the way the Chinese do. And its oil, which is roughly the same volume as what China is importing, is all coming by sea. And yesterday, I think it's called Reliable, it's a privately owned single biggest importer of Russian oil into India. And they said they're not going to buy any more oil. Now, that isn't the end of the game, of course. The Russians and the Indians are probably scrambling to find workarounds for this, but there will be a loss of sales. And what does that mean for the Russian budget? Mr. Trump is right. If we just say that the Russians cannot bring around the Indians to maintain the same level of imports, they will lose 10% of the state budget. 10%. Now that they are now running a deficit because the Russian government is jointly prioritizing guns and butter. That is, all social benefits are rising, indexation is going up, standard of living of the grandma is better than it was last month. All that's going forward, and they have a deficit in the budget. You make a 10% hole in the budget, and Russia is going to be suffering enormously. And Trump knows that, and Putin is denying it. He also knows that. So they've got a big problem He is not dealing honestly with his own people, and he is not making decisions that are rational in light of the behavior of the Americans. The worst thing he could have done was to send Dmitriev to the States just after these sanctions were introduced. And the whole Dmitriev affair in general, just to back up for a moment, is total nonsense. It's only this we Americans and Russians will have great business together. We do big business. Okay, I've heard that since 1975. In 1975 on, I was very deeply involved in all the big business that the United States and Russia would have. And frankly speaking, it was nil. Not because of bad will, but because of the different structures of the economy. And they simply are not, there's nothing to harmonize the way there was and is with Europe, where the two fit together very well. Supplier of raw materials, the United States doesn't really need Russian raw materials. And this project, this mega project, is again, shows a very poor understanding of Mr. Trump. Oh, Trump is a big business, a big real estate developer. So we'll propose to him, we'll build an $8 billion tunnel connecting Alaska and the Russian Far East. To carry what? Nothing. There's nothing to carry. So they thought they were being very, very clever with Mr. Trump, and they have not been very clever. And that carries over to this question of deterrence. I think that Putin has made some very bad choices. Sending Dmitriev was the worst thing he could have done. Making that lame speech a day ago that we still have an option for diplomacy and we don't want a confrontation, that is exactly that is directly against what you were saying, what I am saying, and what people like Dmitry Trainin and Dmitry Simes, who are really very well plugged into the power structure on foreign affairs in Russia, are saying. So there's a problem there.
Why is the Kremlin still acting as if there's a peacemaker in the White House? Trump's rhetoric may sound conciliatory, but in practice, he's pushing even harsher sanctions, ones Biden avoided, like hitting Russian oil directly. Meanwhile, NATO is coordinating long-range strikes deep inside Russia under the guise of a coalition of the willing, with little or no Ukrainian involvement. Yet Russia continues to hold back, seemingly hoping for talks. Why does Putin still behave as if Washington is open to dialogue? And in your view, at what point does this escalation turn into open war?
Well, I think that Mr. Putin's team understands the concept of window of opportunity. The opening of the special military operation in February 2022 was precisely based on a window of opportunity, based on the technological advantage in strategic weapon systems that Russia had satisfied itself was operational and could be used at any moment. The Russia, for the first time in 70 years, was technically, strategically ahead of the United States, not 3 steps behind. Now, that consciousness of window of opportunity, which determined the timing and the manner of the special military operation, is exactly what's missing now. In answer to your point, this is the moment for Russia to strike. The Europeans acknowledge that they have nothing, and they are putting out and publicizing 2029 is the date when they will be ready. Why in hell do they think that Russia is going to sit around waiting to be struck by them because the Europeans are finally ready? If Mr. Putin's team has any strategic thinking, they will recognize that fact and wipe out Ukraine now. Before Europe can do anything, Europeans will be left wringing their hands. The Americans will say, "We told you so," and that's where it will end. If Ukraine's military potential, the decision-making centers are taken out now, which those Oreshniks make manifestly possible, end of game, or game and match. I am dumbfounded that Putin's team has forgotten the notion of window of opportunity. Russia will never have the same advantage it has over Europe militarily that it has at this particular moment.
Doctorow is blunt. Russia's deterrence is collapsing, not from lack of weapons, but lack of will. Power unused is power lost. Putin still believes in diplomacy while the West escalates. Talks are meaningless when your enemy imposes war by other means. Now is Russia's window. Europe won't be ready until 2029. And if Moscow hesitates again, there won't be another chance.